Hello, this is Catherine Dubberly, the Answer Lady. I'm a big fan of Kiss Looms. I greatly enjoy mine, and I am cooperating with Kelly at Kiss Looms to make you a playlist of all the basic techniques that you might ever want to know on all of the looms. So welcome and enjoy.
It has come time to put the neckband on, and I could just knit it separately and then sew it along this edge. But I'm going to try something different. I am using a Tunisian crochet hook. The difference between it and a regular is its greater length and the stopper on the end, which is going to keep my stitches from falling off. You can get by with a regular hook. Working from the right side, I'm going to pick up one loop through the fabric for every stitch, and for most of it it's easy to tell where the stitches are because there's one stitch per bound off area. You can see the little holes I'm working into, I'm sure. It'll get harder in a minute, and I'll show you how to do that. Still pretty straightforward. This is where we were working decreases. Based on the number of stitches that I had in work, I've decided to aim for 28 stitches that I pick up onto this Tunisian hook. And I'll take a look at that when I get there and see if I like that idea. If you're working with a pattern that gives you a specific number of stitches to work in the neckband, go ahead and use that. But I'll show you when you get to the back how you divide it up. Still pulling up loops, working behind the bind off. And as we get up here, there really aren't any more bound off stitches, so I'm working to the inside of the last column of stitches. And I'm picking up approximately every other row, where rows are all I have to count. Let's count my stitches. And I imagined that I would need 28 stitches, and right now there are 26 on here, and here comes the seam, so that looks like a pretty good estimate. 27, 28. Around the back of the neck, we want to pick up one loop per bound off stitch again. So if you were working with a specific number of stitches, we'll just use a nice round number, 80, that are supposed to be picked up in your neckband. And you've got 40 across the back neck. Go ahead and pick up all of those 40 as I'm doing behind the bind off, and divide the other 40 between the sides of the front. If it's an odd number, you may want to handle things a little bit differently. As a matter of fact, I'm going to purposely use an odd number, but I'm first going to pick up an even number. I know that sounds odd, so let me explain. I've already worked out that an even number is going to be what works out. I want the left and right fronts to be the same size. Therefore, I couldn't pick up, say, 27 on one side and 28 on the other and have them be quite symmetrical. And the back just happens to be an even number. I already know from my pattern, and I double checked. So I need to pick up one through each of these bind off windows. So this is what I'm going to do. These stitches that I'm picking up now are going to get hung on the loom. I'll basically work a decrease at the same time as hanging them. I'm going to put the two center back neck stitches, probably right about there, on one peg. That will allow me to end up with an odd number of stitches, which I want to do because that makes nicer ribbing. I will be able to have a knit stitch on each end of my ribbing. See the stitches piling up back here, but they are not coming off. Got 23 on there now. 24, 5, 6, 7, 8. That matches the other side. Now we'll hang them on the loom. Taking these off of the Tunisian hook one at a time. Go around and hang them on the loom. I'm ready for my doubled up stitch. The center back neck contains 32 stitches. That makes 16 and 17 the center stitches. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So that means 16 goes on the next peg and 17 goes on the same peg. And now I'll just keep hanging. So I've accomplished that little decrease that's going to allow me to have picked up an even number of stitches but begin my band, my neckband, ribbing on an odd number of stitches. The size change is minuscule. In most gauges, it's not something that you would notice, so you can alter the pattern in that degree without a problem if you end up, like me, needing an odd number where you had an even number. You want to not twist these loops as you hang them, but it's okay if one gets twisted because you can check before you actually start knitting. Just suppose I get this next one on wrong, and I'm purposely putting a twist in it. I'll be able to look, find that, and flip it over before I wrap my first row. So don't get all distraught over the matter. One note about why we're doing this: it might seem as though you could hang this edge straight on the loom and then knit through from the loom. Theoretically, one can do so, but I usually find it too tight to hang very easily. So this is much easier. Now, are we saving any time over knitting the band separately by casting on, ribbing however many rows, binding off, and then sewing it to the neckband? No, I don't think so. I think this actually takes longer. The reason I like it is I like the finish, the way that it joins to the neckband. So you might try a little swatch both ways. If you don't prefer it, there's no reason to spend the time on it. It's just a kind of nifty thing to know as an alternative. I should point out that though it is not my favorite method, many people actually start the band on live stitches, not having bound off. Put the stitches for the neck on a neck holder. Listen to me. Put the stitches for the neck on a stitch holder as they go out of work for the shaping, or alternatively put them onto a strand of waste yarn. From the stitch holder or the waste yarn, the knitters who like to do it that way will then pick up the neckband stitches onto either needles if they're needle knitting, or the loom if they're loom knitting, and knit the band straight onto live stitches. It's actually more traditional than the ways that I prefer. I like to bind off first because I think that it helps the neckline keep its shape. Over time, all the stress areas of a sweater may stretch and help it lose its shape. And I have good success keeping sweater shapes using my methods. But a great deal depends on your personal knitting style, the fibers that you use, how the garment is taken care of. So your experience could certainly differ from mine in this regard. I should point out before I leave you to your own devices that it's as important to work around the pegs while hanging these loops as it is when you're actually knitting. If I did that, do you see the peg getting included in the stitch? It will cause the same kind of snarls hang-ups and other messes that it would if this were a knitted stitch. In actual fact, it is a stitch that was knitted through the edge, and it's the first stitch of our neckline. Now you will note that this is slightly different than a knit one, purl one neckline, because unless I go to reverse some of these stitches as purls, my very first row is all knits. That's not an accident. It's the better way to do it if you're going to use this method at all. And I think it creates a smoother join. The look is fine with me with the first pickup row as all knits and the others knit one, purl one. And here we are coming down to the finish line. Just a few to go, and it gets easier as you don't have so much knitting on the hook to manipulate. Oops, caught a pin. Don't want to do it. Three, two, and one. Now my working yarn is all the way back over here where I started. And I can just begin knitting and purling across. Before I do, I'm going to double check, count my pegs and how many stitches are on them, and make sure that I have the number I intended to. And here's the finished band. You may see why I like the attachment. It looks so smooth from the right side. From the wrong side, there is a seam, but that's okay with me.